Philip II of Macedon declared his intent to subjugate Sparta should they refuse to yield. The Spartan response, a single word delivered with such profound composure and defiance, continues to resonate through the annals of time. We often envision the Spartans as unclad warriors, charging into combat devoid of apprehension. Yet, beneath the veneer of this legend lies a startling reality. A society far more austere, peculiar, and intricate than most comprehend. The inherent challenge with ancient history is that often, fabricated narratives hold greater sway than factual accounts. Identifying truly dependable sources concerning Sparta's genesis proves exceedingly difficult. As recounted in Sparta's own historical records, the Dorians established their presence in the region approximately 60 years following the Trojan War, an event that ultimately paved the way for Sparta's ascent. As far back as 1824, classical scholars expressed skepticism regarding the origins of this narrative, positing that it was likely fabricated from the very material upon which much of history relies. Propaganda designed to bolster Sparta's reputation and distinguish it from Athens, a city with Ionian roots rather than Dorian. The unveiling of a written system from the Mycenaean era, identified as Linear B during the 1950s, definitively disproved the Dorian invasion theory. The script from Linear B demonstrated that the supposed migration of the Dorians never occurred. Indeed, most movements during the Bronze Age were directed away from the southern Peloponnese, not towards it. The decline of Mycenaean civilization was a gradual process, a confluence of numerous factors that typically unfold over extended periods. Nevertheless, from its ruins emerged that unforgettable Grecian settlement, Sparta. Archaeological findings indicate that Sparta emerged around the year 1000 before Christ, an approximate 200 years or more after the dissolution of the ancient Mycenaean civilization. Sparta commenced as 4 distinct hamlets that coalesced, endeavoring to reconstruct themselves in the aftermath of the preceding culture's collapse. This fusion precipitated a period characterized by disarray, a deficit of legal order, and persistent conflict. Consequently, survival necessitated that the Spartans establish control. Fortunately for them, this crucial solution purportedly materialized in the form of a single individual. According to lore, Sparta would not have endured without the intervention of Lycurgus. The Spartans attributed their subsequent triumphs to Lycurgus and the foundational reforms he instituted during those nascent years. Some historical scholars propose that he was, in fact, a Spartan deity rather than a mortal being. Regardless of his true nature, the transformations attributed to him irrevocably altered the city. One of Sparta's most significant early challenges was the establishment of a dual kingship, a system most historians believe arose from the amalgamation of 2 principal villages that frequently experienced internal discord. One of Lycurgus's paramount achievements was the formulation of the Spartan constitution, a development that, according to most historical accounts, followed the cessation of this dual monarchy. If one is to credit the myths and narratives, Lycurgus introduced a revolutionary new societal structure, communal dining halls where men and young boys partook in meals together, a comprehensive redistribution of land amongst the citizenry, and stringent societal values grounded in simplicity and self-discipline. He forged Sparta's very identity, which may explain why some scholars question his existence, as it raises the question of how one individual could accomplish so much. While numerous records detail Lycurgus's actions, scant accounts elucidate his identity, and those that do exist are frequently contradictory. Lycurgus remains an enigmatic figure, seemingly existing solely to enhance the mythos and historical narrative of Sparta. Certain classical scholars also note that the etymology of Lycurgus's name traces back to the word for wolf, an animal associated with the god Apollo. Some theorize that Lycurgus may have functioned as an alter ego for this deity. One of the principal reasons Sparta continues to captivate the modern imagination stems from its recognition as a formidable warrior society. Their early history indeed suggests a prolonged period of territorial expansion and the consolidation of their security through the subjugation of neighboring populations. In essence, attracting Sparta's attention proved perilous. Sparta's geographical placement within a valley rendered it difficult to access, thereby negating the need for extensive fortifications against potential threats. Amyclae stood as one of the few surviving cities in their vicinity and was considered Sparta's most formidable adversary. However, even Amyclae succumbed, likely around 750 before Christ, with its inhabitants either displaced or assimilated into the burgeoning Spartan city-state. Sparta had one final conquest to secure its position as a dominant power within the Peloponnese and Greece as a whole. According to the ancient writer Tertius, the campaign to subjugate the Messenians, Sparta's western neighbors, endured for 19 years. However, as is often the case, such accounts are subject to doubt. Much of Greek history, as chronicled by poets like Tertius, was intended as much for entertainment as it was for disseminating information. Consequently, historians turn to archaeology and other evidence to construct a more comprehensive understanding of the truth. While the precise duration of this conflict remains debated, and contemporary scholars suggest it occurred at a later juncture than Tertius's account indicates, sufficient evidence confirms Sparta's conquest of the Messenians through a second engagement around the 7th century before Christ. As a consequence, the Messenians were relegated to the status of Helots, a semi-enslaved condition within early Spartan society. With their western frontier secured, Sparta turned its attention to its remaining neighbors. To the east, Sparta shared a border with a region known as Sinuria. The circumstances surrounding Sparta's engagement with Sinuria are less definitively documented. However, their limited population suggests that Sparta continued to exert dominion over them as well. Irrespective of these specifics, by the conclusion of the Second Messenian War, Sparta had emerged as a recognized and influential power, commanding the respect of the rest of Greece for its strength. No other entity could rival the Spartans. Having asserted its dominance over its neighbors, Sparta sought to consolidate its authority. Previously, as exemplified by their successful subjugation of the Messenians, when Sparta conquered a city, they incorporated its populace into their own society, albeit in a subordinate capacity akin to servitude. However, a significant setback in the 6th century before Christ prompted a modification in Sparta's approach to conquered territories. During this era, potentially still operating under a dual kingship, Sparta launched an offensive against their next most significant rival, the city of Tegea. Tegea did not capitulate as readily as other cities had. Following a notable defeat, referred to by ancient poets as the Battle of the Fetters, Sparta found itself compelled to alter its strategy. Instead of attempting to subdue all its neighbors through conquest, Sparta began to pursue alliances. Eventually, these alliances coalesced into the Peloponnesian League, uniting many of Sparta's neighbors through mutual obligation, with Sparta retaining its leadership role within the confederation. When other regions of Greece faced external threats, they appealed to Sparta for assistance. However, there existed one power that could match Sparta's might: Athens. Sparta's initial interaction with Athens appears to have occurred in 510 before Christ, when they ventured northward to aid in the deposition of Hippias, an Athenian tyrant. In that period, The term tyrant carried a far more neutral connotation. At the time, a tyrant was simply a ruler who had ascended to power without constitutional legitimacy, and it did not reflect upon their disposition or governing capabilities. Consequently, Sparta removed Hippias, not out of a sense of justice, but for their own strategic advantage. However, they then overreached. Sparta moved into Athens to depose Hippias, supported by an Athenian aristocrat named Isagoras. They successfully removed Hippias, and the Spartan king Cleomenes assumed command. However, the Athenians were not entirely pleased with this change in leadership. They exiled Cleomenes, compelling his return to Sparta. Nevertheless, from that point onward, Athens remained a coveted target, and tensions between the two dominant powers escalated, igniting a spark that would ultimately ignite a conflagration. Approximately 50 years later, in 499 before Christ, the entirety of Greece found itself embroiled in a conflict with the invading Persians, who sought to conquer Greek territories. This marked the commencement of the Persian Wars, which spanned 5 decades. As the two most influential city-states of that era, smaller communities frequently appealed to both Athens and Sparta for the defense of their lands. One of the most renowned engagements during the Persian conflict was the Battle of Marathon, fought between the invading Persian forces and the Athenians. However, as the battle intensified, the Athenians sought aid from their sole ally capable of matching their strength, the Spartans. The Athenians dispatched a messenger from Athens to Sparta. Recognizing the critical nature of his mission, the man reportedly ran the entire 140 miles separating the two cities to solicit assistance. Upon reaching Sparta, the runner, Phidippides, did not receive the welcome that he or Athens had hoped for. On the day of his arrival, the Spartans were observing a sacred festival, the Carneia. This period mandated a state of peace. Rather than immediately rushing to Athens' aid, the Spartans informed Phidippides that they could not assemble their forces or march to the conflict until the full moon ascended, a delay of at least 10 days. In the interim, this left Athens to defend Marathon independently. The Spartans adhered to their commitment. Once their festival period concluded, they journeyed to Marathon, covering the distance in 3 days. However, by that time, the Athenians had already achieved victory in the battle. 10 years later, the Battle of Thermopylae occurred during the Olympic truce. The Spartans felt bound to honor this truce. The other city-states disagreed and commenced the mobilization of their forces. Sparta, being the preeminent land power, faced pressure to contribute. Without their involvement, they feared Athens might defect to the Persian side. Ultimately, they made an unforeseen decision, one that resulted in tragedy but solidified their place in historical renown. Eventually, the Spartan king Leonidas led a mixed contingent of approximately 7,000 men to defend Greece at the Battle of Thermopylae. The soldiers fought valiantly for 7 days, repelling the Persians until a betrayal from within their ranks provided the enemy with a decisive advantage. Upon learning of this treachery, Leonidas dispatched the troops from other city-states to safety, remaining on the field with 300 Spartans to confront the vast Persian army. Leonidas and the Lacedaemonians demonstrated an unyielding resolve during a pivotal moment, cementing their place as perpetrators of one of history's most renowned last stands. The Spartans fought valiantly until their final breath, fully aware they were significantly outnumbered by the formidable Persian host. While their courage is immortalized in historical accounts, their adversaries could not let their triumph pass without a final, demeaning act of retribution. Xerxes, the Persian monarch, decreed a cruel spectacle be made of Leonidas's deceased form. It is reported that he commanded the body to be beheaded, the skull impaled on a stake, and the rest of the remains crucified. In the year 464 before Christ, Sparta endured a cataclysmic event when an earthquake devastated a substantial portion of the city. Contemporary records suggest that as many as 20,000 lives were lost. Although modern scholars posit this figure may be inflated, the earthquake undeniably crippled Sparta's strength. More devastating than the loss of life, however, was the profound rupture it caused in the alliance between Sparta and Athens. The seismic event triggered an uprising among Sparta's subjugated populace, the Helots. Athens dispatched aid to Sparta, but Sparta, apprehensive that Athenian forces might side with the rebels, returned the reinforcements. This rebuff deeply offended Athens, leading them to annul their pact with Sparta and initiate sweeping political reforms. Athenian sentiment grew increasingly hostile toward Sparta. Officially, the Peloponnesian Wars saw the Athenian-dominated Delian League confronting Sparta's Peloponnesian League. Sparta was unable to deploy its customary formidable strength in the initial Peloponnesian War due to the lingering impact of the earthquake and the subsequent revolt, which had consumed considerable manpower. Consequently, they entered into a 5-year armistice with Athens. This truce, however, was not an indication of surrender, but rather a strategic pause for preparation. While their agreement with Athens was limited to 5 years, they solidified a 30-year peace accord with Argos. This ensured that when the opportunity arose to confront Athens again, Sparta's focus would be undivided. They would be free to concentrate their entire military might solely on Athens. 6 years later, Sparta and Athens clashed once more. This Second Peloponnesian War became the most protracted and consequential conflict in Hellenic history. For the majority of this war, Sparta pursued an offensive strategy, while Athens fortified itself behind its formidable city walls. Sparta commanded supremacy on land, but Athens controlled the seas. Therefore, Athens utilized its naval fleet to launch attacks along the Spartan coast. The nascent Spartan navy proved inadequate, compelling them to seek assistance from an erstwhile adversary. Persia provided Sparta with crucial financial resources to bolster its navy in exchange for territorial concessions in ancestral lands. This infusion of support granted the Spartans the additional power they desperately needed. Sparta then proceeded to blockade Athens by both land and sea. Left with no viable alternatives, Athens was compelled to capitulate to Sparta's overwhelming force. Following extensive deliberations, Sparta permitted Athens to retain its territories. However, their defensive fortifications were dismantled, and they were forced to secede from the Delian League. Athens had been vanquished. For a considerable period, Sparta faced no adversary capable of challenging its supremacy. Subsequently, Sparta briefly maintained its alliance with Persia, forged during their confrontation with Athens. Nevertheless, Persia eventually endeavored to undermine Sparta's dominance, escalating tensions and leading to open conflict between the two states. Persia sought to exploit existing dissenters against Sparta, pitting them against their powerful rival. This led to a series of engagements that ultimately resulted in Sparta reinforcing its authority, with numerous states falling under its dominion. No single city-state possessed the might to confront Sparta. However, Thebes, Athens, Corinth, and Argos, emboldened by a shared objective, believed they could succeed by uniting their forces. This alliance initiated another internal conflict known as the Corinthian War. This time, Persia, now apprehensive of Spartan aggression, lent its support to the opposing factions, culminating in the Peace of Antalcidas. This treaty ceded the Ionian Greek cities to Persia, and aimed to curtail Spartan influence throughout Greece. Despite this peace, Sparta continued its campaign against Thebes, capturing their citadel at Cadmea. The hostilities between Thebes and Sparta persisted until 371 before Christ, when the Spartans encountered a setback they had not experienced in a significant duration: defeat. The Thebans vanquished the Spartans at Leuctra, inflicting severe casualties upon the Spartan forces. Thebes subsequently emerged as the preeminent power in Greece. Sparta also faced internal strife. Citizenship was a hereditary privilege in Sparta. However, the Spartan populace dwindled, while the numbers of the Helot population increased. The population experienced a decline of 50% every 50 years, irrespective of warfare. The very foundations of Spartan society began to erode. Sparta managed to retain a measure of influence for approximately another century. When Messenia revolted, the Spartans were unable to suppress the uprising. From that juncture onward, Sparta's power began to wane. Eventually, they were subjugated by Alexander the Great. Despite their decline, the Spartans never relinquished their identity. During this final period of conquest, Alexander's father, King Philip II of Macedon, dispatched a warning to Sparta. He declared that if he invaded Laconia, he would depose them. The Spartan response was a single, defiant word: no. Nevertheless, Alexander ultimately compelled them to join his League of Corinth, an alliance of Greek states established to unify all of Greece's military capabilities. Although Sparta never regained its former grandeur, it steadfastly maintained its resolute spirit of independence. They were, and always would be, Sparta. Following Alexander the Great's successes, Sparta became incorporated into Macedonia. However, a new power began to ascend in the region: Rome. Although Sparta officially became a constituent part of the Roman Empire, the Romans accorded it the status of a free city. The Roman elite found Spartan customs amusing, attracting Roman visitors eager to witness these unique traditions firsthand. The once mighty Sparta transformed into a tourist attraction. Contemporary accounts vary regarding the extent of Sparta's autonomy during this era. However, everything changed in 396 Anno Domini when Ulrich, the king of the Visigoths, sacked the city. Although it was subsequently rebuilt, it was on a significantly diminished scale. Ultimately, it was abandoned during this period as raiding groups continued to assault the settlement. Sparta had fallen. Today, Sparta exists as little more than a historical echo. Although King Otto of Greece oversaw the expansion of the small medieval settlement of Sparta into a city, and people continue to reside there presently, it no longer represents the glorious center it once was. Nevertheless, Sparta's dominion over ancient Greece and their enduring spirit in the face of adversity live on through legend. Thanks for watching History Expose. If you enjoy uncovering remarkable historical narratives, please like and subscribe to continue your exploration with us. Do not forget to visit our primary channel, Factate, for more astonishing facts on a wide array of subjects.